Okay, picture this. Your local government gives you a nice year-end bonus. You use it, maybe for bills, maybe for groceries. Then months down the line, you get a letter saying, oops, that payment was actually illegal. The big question is, who has to pay it back? Well, this isn't just a thought experiment. It's a real, super confusing problem that the Philippine Supreme Court had to tackle, and their answer created a landmark ruling we're going to break down today.
So yeah, really think about it for a second. If you're the employee who got the bonus and had no idea anything was wrong, should you have to cough up the money? Or should it be the officials who approved the payment? Should they be on the hook for the whole thing? This exact dilemma is what led to a huge legal shift and a brand new set of rules.
So let's set the stage. In the Philippines, we have the Commission on Audit, the COA. They're the government's official watchdog for public funds. When they find a payment that shouldn't have been made, they issue something called a disallowance. It's basically a big red flag that says this money needs to be returned to the Treasury. But for years, the rules on who exactly had to do the returning were, well, they were a mess, super confusing, often contradictory, and it led to some really strange situations.
And that brings us to our case study. We're going to Mondragon in northern Samar, back in late 2013. Now you have to remember the context here. This community was absolutely devastated, reeling from the impact of Super Typhoon Yolanda. So to help its employees get back on their feet, the local government decided to give out a few special allowances.
And look at the reasons for these allowances. You've got economic crisis assistance, help to keep people away from loan sharks, aid for farmers, even an allowance to help people prepare for the next disaster. The intentions here are clearly good. This was all about providing a lifeline to people in a really desperate situation.
But here's the thing about government spending. Good intentions aren't always enough. The COA came in, audited all these payments, and declared the whole thing, all 7.7 million pesos of it, illegal. Why? Because these specific allowances weren't covered under the National Salary Standardization Law. And that, right there, set up a huge legal showdown.
And this is where the story takes a really bizarre turn. The COA came out with a ruling that was so weird, so paradoxical, that even they basically admitted it didn't feel right.
Get this, the COA said that the regular rank-and-file employees who got the money, they could keep it. They received it in good faith, so they were off the hook. But the town officials who approved these payments, they were held personally and, this is the key word, solidarily liable. That means each one of them was now responsible for paying back the entire 7.7 million pesos from their own wallets.
And you know it's a weird situation when the COA itself says, in its own written decision, that this is perhaps an inequitable burden. They saw how unfair it looked, but felt their hands were tied by a bunch of conflicting old rules. And that admission of unfairness is exactly what propelled this case all the way to the Supreme Court.
So when the case, which we now know as Madera versus COA, landed at the Supreme Court, the justices saw something much bigger than just one town's problem. They saw a golden opportunity to finally clean up this mess and create a clear, consistent, and fair set of rules that would apply to everyone, everywhere.
And they weren't shy about it. The court literally called this case the optimum opportunity to fix the system. They knew they weren't just ruling on Mondragon's 7.7 million pesos. No, they were about to build a whole new legal framework from the ground up.
And that new framework is what we now call the Madera Doctrine. It's a truly landmark decision that completely rewrote the rules for how we handle disallowed government payments.
Now, at the core of these new rules is a very old legal idea called solutio indebiti. It sounds fancy, but it's really simple. It just means payment by mistake. The basic idea is if you get money that you weren't actually supposed to receive, you generally have to give it back. This simple principle became the new starting point.
So you can see what a massive change this was. We went from a chaotic, confusing system that created these inequitable burdens to a clear, structured framework. The Madera Doctrine is all about creating a fair balance of accountability for everyone involved in the transaction. And the framework is pretty straightforward. It just breaks the problem into two distinct parts. First, you figure out the liability of the officials who signed the checks. And second, you figure out the liability of the people who actually received the money. Two separate questions.
For the officials, everything now comes down to one thing: good faith. If they approved the payment genuinely believing it was legal and proper, they're off the hook. They are not personally liable to pay back the money. But if it's proven they acted in bad faith, with malice, or were just grossly negligent, then they have to pay it all back.
So what does good faith even mean here?
Well, the court laid out some clues, what they called badges of good faith. Were the officials just following a local ordinance? Was this kind of payment a normal, customary practice that had never been flagged before? Was there any whiff of a dishonest motive? These are the kinds of questions the court now asks.
Okay, now let's flip to the other side, the people who got the money. The general rule now, because of solutio indebiti, is that they have to return it. But, and this is a huge but, the court carved out two very important exceptions. You don't have to pay it back if it was for work you actually did. And, crucially, you don't have to return it if doing so would cause undue prejudice or just be a plain violation of social justice.
So, let's bring it all home. What happened when the Supreme Court took these brand new rules they just created and applied them back to that original case from Mondragon? Well, the result was pretty remarkable.
The final verdict? Nobody had to pay back a single centavo of that 7.7 million pesos. Not the officials, not the employees. Everyone was excused. So, why? Let's break it down.
This is the Madera doctrine in practice. The approving officials, they were excused because they showed all those badges of good faith. They were responding to a national calamity, it was a customary kind of aid, and they were relying on their own local ordinances. And the recipients? They were excused because of that new undue prejudice exception. Forcing typhoon survivors to return financial aid years later would be incredibly harsh and unjust.
So, at the end of the day, what the Madera doctrine really does is create a more sensible, more equitable system. It still makes sure that people who act in bad faith are held accountable, but it also protects public servants who are just trying to do their jobs honestly. And it protects ordinary people from bearing the brunt of a bureaucratic mistake, especially when they're at their most vulnerable.
So the big takeaway here is that this ruling is about so much more than one town's budget. It's about setting a new standard for public accountability in the Philippines. It forces us to ask that tough question. When honest mistakes are made with public money, what does a truly fair solution look like? The Supreme Court has given us its answer. It's a new balance between accountability and basic fairness. The question for us to think about is, did they strike the right balance?